Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Barbara Keller, and I am the Big Game Program Leader with Minnesota DNR. I'm also serving as our temporary legislative coordinator for this session, so this is the perfect nexus of those two roles. I'm here today to discuss our report on the use of crossbows and the effect on our deer populations. As you may recall, in 2023, this legislation was passed and included instructions for the DNR to conduct an analysis on the effect of crossbow expansion to any archery deer hunter on specifically our deer populations in the state. We did opt with this report to include our wild turkey populations because this change did extend and affect our spring archery turkey seasons. The data that we used to conduct this analysis included licensed sales data. It also included harvest registration data. In 2023, we added a question to our harvest registration for deer and turkey on the archery season licenses, asking hunters whether they used a vertical bow or a crossbow to take their deer or turkey. So that was very important to this report. However, we don't have information prior to this change in 2023 on the number of hunters that were already using crossbows, because that was allowed for hunters that were age 60 or older. We also don't know how many deer or turkey were already being taken with crossbows. So we did have a gap there in knowledge, and we attempted to address that with the use of a survey that was sent out to deer and turkey hunters after the 2024 season to help us, again, assess that, how many hunters were already using crossbows, how many were new hunters because of that change, as well as assess wounding loss between those two weapon types, success rates, as well as opinions about the change allowing crossbows. I do want to point out some limitations of this. This only includes 2 years of data. So keep that in mind as we're talking about and going through the results. Hunters probably didn't find out about this change until they picked up the 2023 regulations booklets, which come out in August, and our deer season begins in September for archery deer. So they only had a month prior to archery deer opening. They may have not decided to run out and pick up a crossbow. They may have also been aware of the expiration date associated with this legislation. So that may have affected their decision whether they wanted to spend the money to purchase a crossbow without knowing whether they could continue to use that weapon into the future. Jumping right into the main results of the study, we did not find evidence that the statute change expanding crossbow use had any impact on our deer or turkey populations during those 2 years. We did find that this change may have positive benefits to recruitment and retention efforts, particularly among youth, older aged hunters, and female hunters. You may be looking at that older age part of that, questioning, well, hunters who were already over the age of 60 were already allowed to use a crossbow. However, perhaps those hunters that were younger than 60, maybe between the ages of 40 and 60, may feel physical limitations of using a vertical bow. And so they may be now, instead of having to wait until they reach the age of 60 to pick up a crossbow, they are now, under this regulation, able to do so before that happens. So that might have benefits for retaining those hunters in the sport before they reach the age of 60. This figure shows our license sales for our archery license from 2012 to 2024. The top line represents adult licenses, and then the gray line at the bottom represents youth licenses. You'll see there that we did have a bump in license sales that you can see pretty clearly for our adults that occurred in 2020. That's an effect of the pandemic. We saw an increase in use in all types of outdoor recreation due to the pandemic, and certainly that extended into our archery deer and turkey participation. But then you'll see a slow bleed from that peak into 2020 until 2023 when this expansion occurred, and we did see an increase in license sales for both adult licenses and youth licenses. You can see there the average increase was 6.5%, but we did see higher increases that second year in 2024. We also saw higher increases among the youth. You can't really see it in that line there, but we did have 8.5% increase in youth licenses in 2023, and then a 13.3% increase in 2024. And we saw even higher increases among our female youth. That was a 43% increase in youth license sales for our female compared to a 10% for our male youth. But what we're most interested in as far as the effect that this change had on our deer populations is whether it affected deer harvest. And we did look at our total deer harvest, and that's the most important, the total number of deer that we're taking in any given year. And we did not see any change that we could attribute to the expansion of crossbows on our total deer harvest. In fact, we had a slight decrease in our total deer harvest, 10% the first year and less 3% the second year. However, we did see archery deer harvest increase, a 2% increase in 2023, which is very minor, and that's within the variation that we would typically see in any given year, but a 32% increase in archery deer harvest in 2024. We don't think that 32% increase in 2024 is solely attributed to that expanded use of crossbows. We found that that increase was due to the increase in antlered buck harvest during archery deer season. And I will say, in 2024, we had the latest opening date for our firearms deer season that we can have in a year, and that was November 9th, I believe, in 2024. In 2023, it was November 3rd or 4th. And that's just due to our normal calendar rotation of opening dates of firearms deer season. That meant that our archery deer hunters in 2024 were able to hunt the deer rut more than they usually do, and that leads to a higher antlered buck harvest, generally higher archery harvest when that occurs as well. So we believe that played a role in that higher archery harvest in 2024. I have no doubt that crossbow expansion also played some role in that, but it wasn't solely attributed to that. And we did see both an increase in crossbow and vertical bow hunters in the number of antlered bucks that were taken. Looking at the differences in deer taken, the sex and the age class of deer taken by the different weapon types. So we're looking at crossbow and vertical bow across both of the years. We didn't see any difference in selection from our hunters, whether they were using a crossbow or vertical bow. They were taking about the same types of deer. And even more so in 2024, you can see those numbers for adult males were exactly the same between crossbow hunters and vertical bow hunters. However, we did see that we had a higher proportion of hunters taking deer with crossbows in the second year compared to the first year. So that was 43.8% in 2023. That increased to 48.2% in 2024. Again, hunters are probably learning more about this change. They're hearing about other people hunting with crossbows. They've had longer to think about it. So no surprise that we're seeing that increase, and that's what other states have seen as well. I expect that it would continue to increase if we continue to allow this expanded use of crossbows. We also saw that hunters were more likely to successfully harvest a deer using a crossbow if they were youth or older age hunters. So these two figures show the age distribution of successful hunters during the archery deer season. The age is on the x-axis of this graph. The green line represents the number of deer taken with crossbows by each age class, and the blue line represents vertical bows. So if you look at the very left-hand side of that graph, you'll see the green line is above the blue line for our youngest aged archery hunters. They are more likely to take a deer with a crossbow than a vertical bow. Then that switches over, and vertical bows tend to be where most of our archery deer hunters are using until about the age of 50 or 60 in 2023. It was a little bit later, of about age 60, we see the hunters are more likely to have successfully harvested a deer with a crossbow. But if you look at 2024, that shifted a little bit slightly to younger. So it looks to be about age 55, we're seeing more archery hunters more likely to take a deer with a crossbow. Again, we asked in that survey what percentage of our hunters were already using crossbows due to that age allowance, or we also allowed disability permits to be obtained, and found that 21% of archery deer hunters were already using crossbows prior to this expansion. We did also see that female archery hunters were more likely to have successfully harvested a deer with a crossbow versus a vertical bow, so 64% of deer that were harvested by female archery hunters were taken with their crossbow, compared to 46% by male archery hunters. We did want to pay particular attention to those deer permit areas in our state that are classified as antlerless lottery permit areas. These are areas where firearms deer hunters have to enroll in a lottery to get the allowance to take an antlerless deer. Otherwise, they have to take antlered bucks. However, in those areas, archery hunters can take an either sex deer. They don't have to enroll in that lottery. So we were concerned that hunters, if they were moving from firearms deer season into archery season because of this allowance, we might see a higher take of antlerless deer affecting the deer population. We do tend to implement the antlerless permit lottery in deer permit areas where deer populations are lower and where we want to restrict that antlerless take. There were 31 deer permit areas that were classified as that antlerless permit lottery designation, both before and after the change. So we needed them to have that same designation so we could look at the effect of the change on deer harvest. So I know this graph is a little bit confusing. All of the gray lines represented on this graph represent one of those 31 deer permit areas and the antlerless harvests both before and after the change. And then the green line represents the average of all those together. So you can see, based on that line, we didn't see an increase in antlerless take in lottery deer permit areas that we could attribute to the crossbow expansion. Certainly, this is going to be something we want to continue to watch, as we could expect more hunters to partake in archery deer season. We want to watch that closely, but certainly if we need to adjust antlerless permits or adjust the regulations, we have that ability to do so. Based on the male survey, we also found virtually no difference between success rates, wounding rates, and hunter efforts. They were similar. There were some minor differences, but they were similar between crossbow and vertical bow users. We did ask what percentage of hunters actually participated specifically because of the change allowing crossbows, and found that 11% of hunters began participating in the archery deer season due to this change. 62% of crossbow users are more likely to continue deer hunting because of crossbows having been made legal for all. This is my one slide on turkey, and I won't go into too much detail here. We found pretty much similar effects on the turkey population as we did with deer. Nothing very concerning. With turkey, you do have to choose whether you want to participate in archery or firearms. You don't get to participate in both. Because the archery turkey season, it's much longer than the firearms turkey season, we were wondering whether more hunters would decide they wanted to participate in archery season, but apparently it's still more fun to take a turkey with a shotgun than a crossbow, because we did not see any significant shift into archery turkey, at least at this point, 2 years in. I do also want to point out that, and this is across the board, it's also true for deer archery hunters, it is a pretty divisive issue and polarizing issue amongst archery hunters. And not surprisingly, found that attitudes towards crossbows are more favorable among crossbow users and least favorable among vertical bow users. The results are all in there on the opinions, but it does tend to be a pretty divisive issue. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
So, members, we have decided that we should probably more thoroughly discuss this particular topic today. And even though we went long on the first, we're going to adjust the agenda so that testifiers and members all have enough time. And we're going to be rescheduling the school trust land discussion. Just wanted to let you all know. We have, as I mentioned, testifiers, and we can start with, I think it's Nick. And we're probably going to keep public testimony to about 5 minutes, so if you could kind of target that number, that'd be great. Go ahead, introduce yourself for the record, and proceed.
Yep, thank you, Chair Heinzman and Chair Fisher. My name is Nick Amrud. I'm the president of Minnesota Bow Hunters. You should all have a copy of our petition. We have over 1,000 Minnesota hunters who are against full crossbow inclusion. That is just for having some sort of a compromise where we're not looking at total complete inclusion or fully returning back to 60 plus and disability permits, which is what would happen if this was allowed to expire. We do strongly oppose full crossbow inclusion. If you look at the data from the DNR report, we do see an increase in youth participation during the archery season. It is important to remember that we're not actually adding new hunters. Those kids and a lot of those women that we see the biggest increases in, they are already hunting during the firearm or muzzleloader seasons. They are now just also hunting during the archery season. Is that a net gain? We would argue it's not a net gain. So crossbows do represent a clear separation from user drawn and held archery equipment. Once loaded, the shot process is nearly identical to that of a shotgun or a rifle. Based on data from other states, we are likely to see the majority of bow hunters leave archery in favor of a lower effort and more advantageous crossbow. This notable decline in archers is expected to have a lasting negative participation impact on archery clubs and whole family community events centered around archery. We do have about 1,500 youth participating in the National Archery in Schools program in Minnesota, and another 450 youth archers in 4-H archery, a couple hundred more in archery clubs. So archery is a great sport for the entire family. It just simply is. States with crossbow archery seasons are seeing significantly increased archery season license sales, but the total number of individual hunters and overall deer harvest in states like Wisconsin continues to decline. We recently saw that Michigan has lost 30% of their hunters in the past 30 years, and they have had full crossbow inclusion for half of that since 2009. This is not the R3 solution it is marketed to be. This substantial projected increase in pre-firearm season harvest is going to have a negative impact on firearm season opportunity. And the absolute best weapon for a youth to deer hunt with is a rifle. Having crossbows in the archery season is going to increase harvest directly before the firearm season, and that is going to limit the opportunity for firearm hunters and those same youth that are using a rifle during the firearm season. We have seen higher participation among youth and adult hunters in the past when technology, online resources, and gear options were substantially worse. Overall hunter recruitment and retention is not an archery season weapon allowance issue, but because we do have existing seasons for far easier and more advantageous weapon categories. A simple shift of harvest toward the archery season does not appear to be a management benefit. It certainly isn't one that outweighs the negative impacts to archery, bow hunter opportunity, and overall access issues. The biggest issue we're seeing is people don't have a quality place to hunt. Land is expensive, leasing is incredibly expensive. If we let's say we double the archery season license sales, that is going to have a negative impact on opportunity. We can't just we can't drastically increase participation and not expect them to have some crowding issues and a more negative experience because of that.
1 minute.
So we respectfully ask that you preserve archery seasons for archery and consider a compromise. Thank you for your time. I'll be around.
Thank you for your testimony. We really do appreciate hearing each side of this. Up next is Darren Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Darren Lee with Flaherty and Hood, and I'm here today representing the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. You do have a letter from us in your folder, but I also have just a few brief comments here. On behalf of the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, I respectfully urge you to support the continued full inclusion of crossbows during archery season in Minnesota. This policy is about fairness, access, and conservation. Crossbows allow more Minnesotans to participate in archery hunting, including older hunters, those with physical limitations, and new hunters entering our tradition. These individuals are not asking for an advantage. They are asking for the opportunity to remain engaged. Participation is the foundation of conservation. Every licensed hunter directly supports habitat, wildlife management, and conservation funding through the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Policies that keep hunters involved strengthen both our deer herd and our conservation model. Crossbows do not replace skill or ethical hunting. They remain short-range tools that require preparation, discipline, and respect for the resource. What they do ensure is that more Minnesotans can continue contributing to our conservation legacy. Protecting crossbow inclusion increases hunter participation, conservation funding, and the future of hunting in our state. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you to DNR. I really appreciated the presentation today. The report was excellent. I think it really helps us have data to guide the discussion. With that, I'll just open it up for questions. Representative Jordan, you're first on the list.
Oh, I had questions about school trust lands, but no. You know, I understand the concern about losing that heritage around traditional archery. You know, we hear a lot of great stories about fishing with your dad or your grandpa, but I grew up shooting bows and arrows with my brother and my dad, and we made our own bow. My brother and I would make our own bows and arrows and get in trouble that way. And I really see crossbows as a way to continue that tradition of hunting and angling. We, you know, I just really do think that this is where the growth in the sport is. You know, I've sat in this committee for a number of years, and I love this committee, but we talk about our concern around losing growth in hunting and fishing. And if we don't start to adapt to where people want to take game in a legal and ethical manner, I don't see any, you know, I remember reading in Hunter Safety, The Art of Fair Chase, and I don't see crossbow as part of that. I see crossbow as a way to grow and get more people, and people like me who loved archery. I mean, I would even write little book reports about archery books, and it was really kind of my weird nerdy thing, which I think is a shock to people around this table. But, and I see books like The Hunger Games really making girls and kids interested in archery, and I think crossbow is the way that we're growing that. It's an addition, not necessarily a way to take away from that tradition. And it's, you know, one that shooting compound bows or even making traditional bows like we see on like shows like Alone. This is just another way to do that. And I don't see any this is how the sport is growing, and we need to accommodate that. I'm sure there are ways we could talk about how any kind of legislation going forward should look. And I think it's good to have those conversations, but I think anytime we're talking about archery and how to get more people involved in it, that's a good thing. And I think the ways we've experimented with crossbow has been a good thing these past couple years.
Thank you for that. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman, and thank you for the report today. And I was expecting the report to look much like what it is, and I think it shows that what we want to see is opportunity, just like Representative Jordan has so eloquent. I think we all learned something about you today about making your own bow and whatever, and I think it's an opportunity. It's really giving opportunity. And I was going to give Representative Swedzinski a hard time when he was here earlier. Need to redefine success because, sometimes oftentimes we think of, harvest as being the success, but I was going to give him a hard time, but I decided not to about that. We just need to make sure we got a good picture of a sunset, because that's what my wife likes to do when I bring home a picture of a sunset and not of an animal. But it's but it really is about enjoying the outdoors, spending time with family or whatever it is, or putting food on your table, and I think it's just another tool that I think it gives that opportunity. And whether it gets a young person out, I think I was probably most surprised in the report that I think it showed that girls were the ones that were the ones that had the highest increase, I think, and I know my son this year, he turned 10. He was excited because he was finally able to get the hunt big game in Minnesota. And he wanted to hunt with archery. And I don't know if Minnesota still has the 40-pound limit, but he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to draw back at 40 pounds. And so he was asking me, do you think I could talk to Grandpa and use his crossbow if I can't pull back 40 pounds? Well, he was able to get 40 pounds by hunting season. So he was really proud of that and excited to be able to use a vertical bow. But at the same time, he had that option of having a crossbow if he needed it, and it was just a fun time that we were able to spend outdoors and making memories, but most of all, it's introducing people to the sport, and I think that's really what we're going to see. And I would expect that some of these youth that are joining in that might not be able to draw the 40-pound weight, that when they get there, they probably will use a vertical bow until maybe later in their years. I've got some friends that the 60-pound bow is too much for them now, and now they're having to decrease it, and it's kind of a blow on their ego, and so they're looking at, well, maybe instead of giving up or decreasing, or quitting completely, maybe having that time with maybe with their grandkids with a crossbow out in the woods is having that opportunity. So thank you for this, and I think it does lead to more conversation. So thank you.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. And I guess for me, more comment than question. If there was a shortage of deer, I might look at this differently. But as a farmer with deer depredation issues, I mean real deer depredation issues, I've seen as many as 70 deer roaming across my field at one time. And I had one field in particular where the deer got 90% of that corn crop. So I don't care if we're expanding rifle usage, if we're expanding crossbow usage, I don't care how we expand it, I just want them gone.
Members, let's be careful now. Representative Warwas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I was listening to it, and I was seeing this. We talk about percentages of increase in various parts of these harvesting statistics, and I saw the crossbow harvest. 64% of deer harvested by female archery hunters was a real interesting number to me. But what I really want to know is, what does that mean in actual numbers of animals? 64%. What does that look like in actual numbers?
Go ahead.
Chair Representative Warwas, I can get those numbers to you directly. I don't know off the top of my head. We typically for archery season, I believe it's in here. We have around 100,000 archery hunters, and I think we typically harvest just under 30,000 deer. So I don't know how many of those were due to female archery hunters, but I can look up that number.
Okay, Representative Chair, thank you. Appreciate that.
I had a question, if it's okay, since we're at the end of the list. We talked in the previous presentation, the bill presentation, about hooking mortality. I don't think that the study looks at the differences between vertical archery and crossbows in terms of the numbers of deer wounded versus taken. But you might have a comment, and I just wanted to give you a chance if you had any information on that.
Thanks, Chair. We did look at the difference in wounding rates between the two weapon types and found that they were essentially the same. So we're not expecting with the expansion of crossbows that we would have more wounded deer. And I believe we saw the same wounding rate with firearms that we did with crossbows. So we're not anticipating that with the expansion of crossbows, we will have more wounded deer and thus higher deer mortality than we would otherwise.
No, I appreciate that. It just is something that I know that I'm going to get a question back home. Is there a difference? Is there potentially a greater? And there had been some predictions that folks would be taking shots that they otherwise shouldn't be. So it's good to know that that wasn't an issue that you found in your study and your research. So not seeing any more questions, members. Oh, no, you don't even, Representative Falconer, by all means, we have extra time.
I know. Would Representative Nelson be open to a question?
I think Representative Nelson would be fine with that.
Okay, you're kind of leaving us on the cliff edge here. What did success look like for your 10-year-old? Was it a sunset, or was it an animal?
Nelson.
Inquiring minds need to know.
Sunset or animal?
Well, for myself, it was sunset pictures this year. So for Zeb, it was not a sunset. It was he was successful this year. So
Congrats, good job.
that probably makes me happier than harvesting one myself.
100%.